Hello, it's Joyful Hermit. I'm going to share how I got this crucifix. Um, and it was back in 2003. But I want to say why I'm sharing this is because my knee has been so terrible again. I found out that the physical therapist had lied to me 3 times, definitely 3 times specifically, and maybe more. I might have asked more, but that he could reverse this, that he was breaking up this fibrous tissue that's 2 inches covering my knee and causing very severe pain and difficulty. And I'm having to stretch it or extend it off and on all day, which is painful in itself. And it's hindering my ability currently to be able to function much. And the pain of that, which is severe on top of my spine pain, has been very hard for me to adapt to and accept. That's why I've asked for prayers, and it may take some time for my mind and emotions to be able to adapt to this level of pain. But I am fairly convinced that God allowed this to happen to my knee because there were just terrible miscommunications, incorrect information given me, or no information given me by 3 or 4 different professionals. And then I didn't even see the surgeon until after 8 weeks had passed. And despite my pointing out my knee to an in home physical therapist who didn't recognize that something was wrong, I thought something seemed wrong. But he said, no, all knees are swollen and it'll probably swelling will go down. And the pain, they said, well, it's going to hurt, but it was over the top pain. So I have this condition that's irreversible and permanent. Thank heavens I'm old. But still, it's causing a major change in my life. It's going to, it has already. But I had been praying, asking the Lord, feeling that I wasn't doing His will and not fulfilling my mission in life. Even my 3 adult children, chaos had been going on for off and on 10 years of um, not good relationships. And uh, I wasn't letting go. I kept thinking, keep serving, keep offering, and to be there for them. But they didn't want that. And it wasn't like it was often. I'm a hermit after all, but it was, I think, my attempt of being loving and kind and helpful, but God didn't want it. So all 3 of those have cut away in the last 8 months now, and one in the last few weeks finally came to a head. And um, but that's when God gave me this means of way forward, of living on the other side, being on the other side, and being dead in the temporal world, so that my interactions will be sharing, texting, email, or praying and loving. Very little sharing messages, but not interacting with people in general. I can't be up and around much, for one thing, but like, for example, I won't be calling or texting in general unless I sense and I'm learning to discern messages that I am to give people. Could be family member or could be someone else, a friend who maybe has sent an email, or someone I encounter in a rare errand I might do. So, or sharing here. I'll probably be doing more sharing here. But during this time, it's been very hard on me. I've gotten emotional about it, of just the amount of pain I'm trying to deal with, and trying to understand and accept it, and knowing that it's come from God, that it's something good that God has allowed, even though we may think God wouldn't allow something like this. But no, I'm convinced it's from God, and the way forward also is God. But when we have times like this in our life, I realize it's good to remember when God has reached in our daily lives with miracles, and it could be what we'd consider a minor miracle, or just some way that God has touched us and has lifted us up emotionally and mentally and even physically at times. So that's why I want to share about this crucifix. Back in 2000, or it was 1999, that I became a hermit, had a call from God, but I was in a community of hermits just briefly, about a year. And it was an international experiment that someone in another country, their vicar general had allowed it, their bishop, to start that and to try it. It lasted maybe a year or a couple of years, I think. I got out of it within the year because I didn't sense it was God's will for me, or that it was developed in a way that was going to succeed. And so I also had come across aspects of this community of hermits that we stayed in our own communities, in our own homes. But it was different hermits dotted around the world, really. Not many, but it was just a startup type of community. But we were to wear a habit. And quickly I realized wearing a habit was not being hidden. And many other reasons started coming up. Having a different name. It wasn't what I knew and had learned already of hermit life. To be hidden from the eyes of humans. To live in silence of solitude. To not stand out. To be very humble and out of the way. So anyway, I had since gone out to stay with my elderly mother, who was in the process of dying. She had terrible lung problems. So I went out to try to help her she lived in a retirement community somewhere. My father had already died. So I went out there to be of help to her. And, but I guess I'm not explaining clearly. When I wore the habit of that community of hermits, we wore a Benedictine crucifix around a simple cord like this. But it wasn't an old crucifix. I just got one, a Benedictine one, to wear. It didn't matter what type of crucifix. So it was a new crucifix, an inexpensive one that I wore. But I would be out and about, and of course in this habit, which sort of stuck out, but that was how it was to be. I was following the directions of the head of this community. And but let's say I'd be running an errand, and a child with a parent might notice my shiny new crucifix and be drawn to it and want to touch it, or even would be so enamored with it, I would be drawn to give the child the crucifix. I would say, ask your mother if it's all right for you to have it. Oh, and they would be thrilled, and the mother would say yes. So I would take the crucifix off and give it to the child. I'd go buy another and wear it. So like 2 or 3 times, the crucifix would be given to someone, an adult who loved it, a handicapped person who loved it, or the one time was the little child. So, and it happened out when I was visiting with my mother and trying to help her. I ran an errand for her, and somebody was drawn to the shiny new crucifix that I had taken with me to wear. By that time, I was not wearing a habit at all. I hadn't for a year. I just wore a plain gray jumper and a gray t-shirt. Nothing, I tried to blend in that way. Um, so anyway, I was without a crucifix then, but I thought, well, when I go back to where I lived, I would just purchase another one from a bookstore that was in the parish. So they had these crucifixes I could buy. But my mother needed me to take some things. She was ridding out things, to take some of her things to a store called the White Elephant. It was a thrift shop, but it took in monies to help the poor and different charities where she lived. And so I took several things in. I had never been there before. So I walked in. It was like a warehouse type building with huge spaces. And I walked into one room and was way off. It was a good 50 to 100 yards, maybe the size of well, it wasn't a football field, a half of a football field. Huge, huge room. And off on one side in the distance were counters where they kept things, and a couple of women behind the counter. So people could go and look, and jewelry or whatever was in it, I didn't know at the time. But a woman there started waving to me, come, come. And so I could barely see the person way off behind his counter. But I walked across this vast warehouse room to this counter, and the woman who had waved to me to come to her pulled open a drawer and pulled this crucifix out. It didn't have rings on it, it didn't have a cord, just the crucifix, didn't have a medal on it. Held it up to me and said, I think this is meant for you. I think you're supposed to have this. She handed it to me. I could tell it was very old. And I thought, oh, this is precious. This is worth a lot, just in its age of it. And I said, oh, I couldn't possibly. And no, this is meant for you. I know you're supposed to have this, the woman said, the volunteer behind the counter. And I said, well, how much? How much? I want to pay you for it. I didn't have a lot of money. I was, the crucifixes I had bought were $5 from the church gift shop. And they were new and they weren't solid or anything, but they were shiny. I think that's what drew the attention of the child that I gave one to. But she said, how about $4? Well, I happened to have $4 in my pocket. I usually just had big pockets on this jumper, and I would just put my car keys in one and my wallet in the other. So I gave her the $4. I couldn't believe it. I said, thank you so much. I said, I didn't have a crucifix. I'd given my last crucifix away. And so here was this crucifix, and my mother needed something from Walmart. So I went to Walmart and did her purchase for her and bought a black cord to put around it. And at the time, I didn't have a medal or anything or these rings either. So I have 2 rings on it now. These rings were added later. My spiritual father, who was by then, I think, about 90, or no, maybe 85, when I got back to my hometown after helping my mother, he wed me to the cross. This is my mother's ring, and this is my father's ring. My mother had dispersed all her jewelry except for the wedding rings and things that she wore on her fingers. But this was her first engagement ring, and this was a ring of my dad's that he used to wear. So my spiritual father wed me to the cross with these rings. And then this was a little medal that had an image of Mary on it that I added to it. But the image is lost. But I liked it that way. I thought, I never forget what Mary looks like. So the Virgin Mary's here, and these rings. I was wed to the cross. But um, that's how I got this crucifix, just like that. And I just, it, I wear it, and I have started wearing it day and night to help me get through this time period of adaptation, of double the suffering, and to accept this suffering, and to accept that God gave this to me, this knee pain and this knee disability. He gave it to me so that I would refocus on what He wanted of me. And what He wants of me, as I've mentioned before, is to be deceased and to be as if I am on the other side, loving and praying for people on earth, and being alert to anything God or Mary or anyone from the other side tells me that is a loving and helpful message for someone on earth that I can write or email or tell it to them, or a message that's loving but also one that's sort of corrective, as I did the other day. I wrote to this friend who had decided I was demonically oppressed and kept sending me all these exorcism, a diary of an exorcist, um, writings and things. And my message back to that person was, read the collected works of John of the Cross. Read the letters even of Teresa of Avila, where she gets into personalized teaching. I said, elevate your soul. You already know enough about the devil. You're a very strong person. And I'm not demonically oppressed. God is the one that's allowing this suffering, like He did for Job, to strengthen my faith and to form me more into what He wants me doing, which is sharing these experiences, and to remind people when you're struggling, remember some miracle, everyday miracle, that God provided for you, that uplifted you and took your breath away and was uncanny. You know, this woman didn't know me. I had never been there before. She didn't know I needed a crucifix. And indeed, I was going to need a crucifix while I was there visiting my mother. My mother had gotten into New Age. And maybe I'll share that experience of a demonic experience in which I was forewarned. But my mother was involved with this good friend she had developed, who was a very demonically oppressed. I don't think possessed, that's rare, but definitely she was oppressed and was on a wrong path spiritually, and even had an indication of that on her body. So, and was trying to draw my mother away from Christianity, and was so far succeeding. So it was good that this came to me. God knew I needed it and would need it then and there, not wait for me when I would maybe 6 weeks later go back to my hometown. So anyway, remind yourself of the miracles and the good things that God has done for us when we are down and struggling. It will, and if it's something tangible, keep it on you or near you. This will help strengthen. And crucifix, it doesn't have to be one that's given to you under unusual means. Wear one, have it blessed, and wear it to protect you, so that you aren't tempted to go into despair. I'm tempted by that, but if I were demonically oppressed, I would be in despair. I would not just fall to the temptations, I would be there. Anyway, that's my little message for now on how to keep being reminded of God's goodness to us and His love for us and His everyday miracles. Just that we wake up is a miracle. God bless His real presence in us. I'm praying for you. Remember, love in Christ's love.